And let's see, Mike, what year did you graduate?
74.
74, yeah. I got to watch you wrestle when you were a senior. And we started doing wrestling coverage a lot after that. Well, here's a picture. That's me and your dad broadcasting at Arlington. I've had that close by. I'll refer to this a little bit later on. But Perry, you're in there. You're up there. We're doing one more broadcast and program together right now. And he will be a part of what we're doing here in a little bit. By the way, I wanted to mention, this past week I talked to Thor Mickelson, Walt Mickelson's grandson. He was in town. He passes along his condolences and also the pride that their family had and your dad working for Mickelson Media all those years. So I wanted to share that. And for me, what an honor to be here. You know, how often does a person get to come up and be involved in something like this, or a person that hired them, was a major part of their career, and not everybody gets that opportunity, and I feel very fortunate. So thank you, family, for giving me this chance. All right, I'm gonna play a little tribute to Perry that you heard this if you were at that January 6, 2000 roast and toast to Perry Galvin. And this is something that Brian Filzen put together. It's about 2.5 minutes long. It's a little bit of history of Perry and also with the radio station. I think it's a good way for us to get this started. So Eric, when you're ready.
Perry Donald Galvin, the Walking Eagle. Born in Minneapolis, July 18, 1932. Perry graduated from Washburn High School in 1950. In the fall, enrolled at the University of Minnesota. His college studies were interrupted in the fall of 1952 when he enlisted in the Navy. In 1954, Perry and Marion were married and living in San Diego. In 1955, Perry was transferred to the state of Washington and assigned yeoman to the carrier USS Lexington. The Lexington in 1956 left for Japan, and Perry and a buddy kept the troops entertained with a humorous newsletter, which some believe was the forerunner to Galvin's Groner. After the service, Perry returned to the University of Minnesota, graduating with a degree in journalism in 1958. The family's next stop, Redwood Falls and the Redwood Gazette. A year and a half later, he was regional editor of the New Ulm Journal. With the Journal at KNUJ owned by Mickelson Media, Perry began his long career of news, sports, and advertising with KNUJ.
In the news, concerns over Y2K don't appear to be too prevalent in this part of Minnesota.
In 1963, he made the switch to KNUJ exclusively. 1974-75, Perry Galvin was awarded the Dick Seabrook Gopher Award for sports coverage. Perry was also co-founder of the KNUJ Player of the Week show with Don Brand. General manager of KNUJ, 1973 to 1982. We celebrated Perry Galvin Day in 1993. Over the years, Perry has been very active in the community. New Ulm JC's, New Ulm Country Club, Brown County Fair Board, New Ulm Club, Rotary, Legion Baseball, Chamber of Commerce, Hub Club. Perry Galvin, the father of 10 children and gramps to 14 grandchildren. We salute you, Perry Galvin.
Friday, December 31st, the final day of the millennium, and also my final KNUJ broadcast this year, and probably for a while.
So Brian put that together, very nice, and again, we played that on January 6, 2000. Okay, grandchildren, 20 now, so it was 14 at that time. a little more multiplying during the years. All right. Well, Perry hired me, and I started on the Galvin's anniversary day. He always referred to it. I started on October 20th. And he always knew and remembered when I started, 1975. And it was pretty cool. Perry was the guy who gave me my chance at KNUJ. He was my mentor and a good friend. Two things I remember from my first day of work, that October 20th. Well, as Mike Brigger's here, he was a sales guy also, and Marge. And Perry, my first day of work, we didn't get a lot of training back then. It was kind of go out and start selling. But he gave me a little, tore out something out of the newspaper, out of the journal. There was going to be an open house or some celebration going on at the Six Fat Dutchman web station down on North Broadway. And he said, go sell them something. I think Mike or somebody told me we had a package of 20-second ads. I went down to the web station and I got a sale. And I came back and Perry was so proud. It was pretty cool. Well, then later that day, Perry was still so excited that this young sales rep was going out and getting a sale on his first try. They'd invited me at 5 o'clock to go to press club. Wow, this is pretty special. I get to go to press club on my first day of work. So we walked down the steps, got to the sidewalk, went to the corner, we took a left, walked down to Shorty's Bar. We walked in, and the table to the immediate left had folks from the Journal there. Okay, so we're all Mickelson media people. Ron Wieland, Bruce Fensky, Leo Dorschner, Cal Backer. And they were all there. And we played a game of shoot, a card game, and we played a game of shoot for a drink. And we did that many times after work and Saturday mornings after the Player of the Week show. Perry was a finalist for the 1992 Minnesota Broadcasters Outstanding Personality of the Year. He was edged out by someone no name by the name of Roger Erickson from Don Marbin from Lake Crystal. He's at the Lake Crystal Tribune. He said that Perry had a unique style of selling advertising. He said it's called blackmail. Just this week, I stopped in at Joe's Camper Sales, and Joe Lamacher, Perry used to sell advertising to Joe Lamacher. And he said, the one thing I remember about Perry, and Mike and Marge, you'll relate to this, Perry would always walk in about the 28th of the month. And his reason, well, he would come in and he would chat, and then he'd say, you know, I can save you the cost of a postage stamp. You want to just send a check along with me today? His purpose was commissions and making sure bills got paid on time. Perry was absolutely phenomenal on making sure people paid their bills. Perry, the sales guy. Perry would be making his calls and stops around town. And he called on most of the banks. I think there were 3 of them back then, just 3. And if he saw an auction bill, you know, like they have for auctions, if he saw an auction bill on their bulletin board, Perry would take that sucker off the bulletin board, stick it in his coat pocket or in his little briefcase, and he'd bring it back. I mean, he stole the darn thing. And he'd bring it back to the station. Well, how did we get our leads for some of that stuff? He'd walk in, he'd decide, well, this is Mike or this is Jim or whatever, this is yours. Now go sell them something. I was always amazed how he could just go walk and pull off those auction calendar things. Unbelievable. All right, Perry, the business guy. In 1977, KNUJ dove into coverage of volleyball. We had 3 teams make it to the state tournament that year. Medelia, Wabasso, and Gaylord. Gaylord won it, I think. And Perry decided we should cover those teams. We should do play-by-play of volleyball. It had never been done on KNUJ, and then much less, I don't know if any other radio station in the state of Minnesota had done volleyball yet. You did football, you did basketball, baseball, whatever. Well, anyway, those teams made it. Well, I went up and I covered him. I had officiated some volleyball, so I had a little background. And after the first team broadcast, Perry got on the phone in between games, and he said, I gotta tell you a story, Jim. Here's what just happened. Well, the station president at the time and part owner was George Correntian. Remember George Correntian from Travel Fun Tours? He had been at KNUJ many years. Well, anyway, George was no longer at KNUJ, but he still had the ability to call some shots if he wanted to. And anyway, he called up the station after we finished the first game. I think the first game was Medelia. And Perry told me that George said, hey, Galvin, are you nuts? You're doing play-by-play of volleyball? Perry interrupted him. And he said, George, we just sold $1,000 today on volleyball for covering those teams. There's a pause. And George said, yeah, Perry, that's great radio. He hung up, and yes, George was a businessman too. News stories. Brian reminded me of this the other day as we were sharing, because a few of us at the station were hired by Brian. Tom Wheeler was around at that time. I guess Perry didn't hire Tom or Brian, but he was there when they were working for a number of years. News stories. So often, Perry would be doing a news story, and somehow at the end of that news story, if he knew that he could tie that into a plug for a client of his, he would throw it in. Did that so often and so smooth as he was doing it. Well, he was infamous for his memos. And late in the summer, somewhere in the 70s, the year the Yankees and the Red Sox had a one-game playoff. You know, if you tie, then there's a one-game playoff. Well, we, us sales guys, Mike and I and Jim Tesson, we wanted to watch this game. It was an afternoon game, so we decided we'd go to my house in Lafayette, get out of town, and no one would know we were watching the game. We told them we were selling. Somebody blew our cover. Perry found out. The next morning, each of us had a memo on our desk. It said, guys, you were watching the game. You should have been out selling. Don't let that happen again. That was a stupid joint decision. The stupid joint decision memo, we have talked about that for years. And it was his polite way of disciplining us and making sure we knew where the bear crept in the woods, right? Perry, Jerry, and Ron Grieser and Don Brandt. Don was from the Journal, and anyway, those guys, they went up to Ely one year. They flew up to Ely. Perry talked about this story more than once. And they had to cover a state baseball tournament. So up to Ely they went. It got late, whatever. They came back and they had a storm they had to fly around. And you know, it's a late night game anyway, extra innings, whatever it was. And they flew back, and they had to fly around the storm, so they get in late. And Ronnie Grieser was a pilot on the plane. And he's putting the plane down, and at the last minute, he opens the throttle up and flips the flaps, and up they go again. Up they go. There's a pause again. Well, after a few of the guys, I think, stained their underwear, Grieser said to Perry and Don and Jerry, bad hunch. I think I would have been scared too. That's the bad hunch story, so that's another one that we remember. I'm not sure if the family remembers this a little bit to the sad side, but there's a positive story. Perry almost died in my office. He had his heart attack. He came to my office, we were above the Grand Hotel, and he walked in, and he closed the door, and he sat down, and he looked at me and he said, Jim, I think I'm having a heart attack. And he said, I got some tingle down my arm, I'm a little short of breath. I said, Perry, can you walk to my car? I can do that, he said. I opened the door, I took him by the arm, and I looked to my left. Doris Ofterheidy's desk was there. And I said, Doris, call right now and have him have a wheelchair by the door. Got down, drove him to the clinic, wheelchair was there, Perry was having a heart attack, they got on it right away, and I don't know, 6 weeks or whatever later, he was back at work. But I'll never forget that, but he had the wherewithal to come in and for us to talk about it and get action taken, and thank God Doris made that phone call helping us out too, because they were right there. Perry said on his retirement day at KNUJ that 2 of his most memorable experiences in the years he was at KNUJ, okay, so he was there, 35 years.
Wow.
One was in his first year working. He said the day Kennedy was assassinated.
Wow.
We had the AP wire at the station, and the old teletypes, they had bells that rang. So, if there was just a simple story, it was one ding. I mean, it was a good bell. And it was one ding, and if it was more serious, it was 2, 3, whatever it was. And you got to the very serious things, like if Pearl Harbor was attacked or whatever it would be, the sucker would really just ding, 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 forever and ever. And Perry talked about that. And he said it came in about 12:30. It was right after the noon news, and the AP bell just rang and rang and rang. And so that was one of his memories. The other one he mentioned was 1972, St. James winning the state basketball tournament. Perry broadcast those games, and he remembers Jeff Nessler making that last second shot from half court as St. James beat Melrose to win the state championship. That was another one. So those are the 2 things. I had a chance to talk with Perry and get some of these things documented, because his history is pretty phenomenal, and he had a great memory. A couple of stories that Mike Bringer shared with me. Mike, I'll try to do the best on these. And these would be, we think, somewhere in the 60s. Perry and Jerry Walston, and by the way, Scott Walston's son, sends along condolences. I talked to Scott the other day, and on behalf of the Walston, because Jerry and Perry worked together a long time. Jerry was an engineer at the station and all that business. Well, anyway, the first one, they went out to broadcast a kiddie parade in Fairfax, Mike, right? They went out to broadcast a kiddie parade. And Perry and Jerry were there with the remote unit. And as the broadcast goes along, all of a sudden, Perry is doing the broadcast, says, "There's been a wreck." There's a pause. Perry says, "Yes, a little boy on a trike just hit a little girl on a bicycle." So again, you have all these things: stupid joint decision, bad hunch, there's been a wreck. And these, short titles to these stories. Well, there's another one. This time they're in Winthrop covering a parade. And Perry announces that the Winthrop Junior High band was going by. Okay. Now the crowd noticed that this was probably not the best band in the world. Perry says it's the junior high band going by, and Mr. Amundsen, the band director, came by the broadcast booth, and Perry's conducting an interview with him and says, "Hey, Mr. Amundsen, great to see the junior high band from Winthrop here in the parade." Mr. Amundsen quickly retorts, "Junior high band? Heck, that was their senior high band." These are true stories. Jerry Walston, a longtime friend and radio partner at KNUJ, often told me, as he and I would go out for broadcasts, often told me that when they get to broadcast locations, Perry wanted nothing to do with setting up the equipment. He was not very technical. And they carried the equipment in up, and as soon as it was there, on cue, Jerry said that Perry would say, "See ya, Jer." And Perry take off to get started lineups, talk to anybody else there, but not be around to help us set in the equipment. Perry was the focus of a skit that Mike Berger and I wrote, and we presented at the March 1980 Player of the Year banquet at the Orchid Inn in Sleepy Eye. I don't imagine any of the kids were there. And this was kind of a classic. Mike and I had started doing some skits. We did one on Dragnet the year before, kind of did a spoof on Dragnet, the TV show. Well, you remember around 1980, I hope I'm not going too long, Rick, but you're stuck with me for a while. Anyway, 1980, one of the big TV shows was Dallas. Remember Dallas? And remember who shot J.R. Ewing? All right, they played that off. You had to wait till the next fall or something. Well, Mike and I put together a skit, and it was entitled, Who Shot J.R. Galvin? I have the script. I'm just going to read a little bit because the whole thing is absolutely fabulous. But it starts out, and Perry was a key actor in this. He had to play dead for a while, and then he had to wake up. All right? So anyway, a hand appears from behind a partition, a gun is pointed, a shot is fired. We had Jerry Walston get one of these track guns, you know, that you start a track race with. Okay, so the shot is fired, and Perry Galvin slumps over in his chair. And he did it well. I mean, his head banged down on the chair, the whole thing on the table. Anyway, from there we had the theme of the Dallas show start playing in the background. And Mike and I are the two hosts for this, and it's Who Shot J.R. Galvin? And I won't go through all of them, but for instance, we started saying, well, did Don Brand do this? Don, KNUJ news director, did he shoot the big guy because it was a slow news day? Or was he simply sick of Galvin's rotten jokes? Denny Frederickson, who's here? Was it Denny Frederickson, the newly elected state senator? Did he shoot JR for political reasons? Do you think it was Perry painting mustaches on his campaign posters? Or was it Marge Frederickson, KNUJ salesperson and the senator's wife? She was tired of leading a double life at Galvin's side during the day, and in Denny's arms. Did she shoot J.R. Galvin? If not, who did? You're about to find out. And it goes on and on. It's absolutely fabulous. Anyway, at the end of this, and this plays into Perry really well. At the end of us, we had someone come up with an old Richard Nixon mask. You know, if he was involved, and he says, "I'm still looking for my tape recorder," and all of that. And then I said, well, this is getting out of hand. Doesn't anyone know anything? And someone else said, there is one thing. I don't think JR is dead. Just listen. So at that point, I go over by Perry, and I put the microphone down, and Perry starts snoring. and he wakes up in this skit, and then he says, that nap felt good. I was really shocked. Perry couldn't have come up with a better line than that. Wow. Pretty cool. Anyway, the entire skit was a classic. Perry the businessman, GM. Mike Berger mentioned this. Super Bowl Blizzard. Anybody remember the Super Bowl Blizzard? 75, right? Yeah. I was working in Mankato at the time. But Mike was already working at the station. And Mike said he couldn't even see across the street from his home in New Ulm. It was snowing so heavy. Well, Perry calls him on the phone and asks where he is. Mike says, well, I'm at home. It's horrible out, Perry. Perry says, yeah, but it's a perfect day to be selling snowblowers, shovels, and stuff. And we need to be selling to those stores and dealers today. I'll have someone come out to pick you up. Sure enough, in 15 minutes, a snowmobile pulled up to the house and Mike came into work. And anytime it snowed, Perry was on it. All right, and so you call Retzloff's or wherever else, and whoever was selling snowmobiles. He was a businessman. I recall doing a broadcast with Perry at Arlington. You saw the picture. I think it was a regional game. Cathedral was playing baseball against Merritt Lutheran. Stan Wilford, remember Stan Wilford? Stan and Perry are having some chats in heaven right now. You sure know that. Well, anyway, Stan Wilford was retiring at the end of that season. We knew that. And he was a big Cathedral baseball coach and a very good long-time coach in New Ulm. And after our broadcast, Perry had lined up special sponsors for a Salute to Stan segment, a special show, and he, of course, had sold extra sponsors for this. All right? So they did the entire broadcast, and for some reason, I don't know what happened, but we found out it didn't go on the air. They cut us off at the station. And so I found out, and after they're done, I went up and I said, guys, it didn't air. Perry says, let's do it again. And they did the whole 15-minute show a second time, almost word for word. It was great. It went off flawlessly, but I'll always remember that. We had to do the Salute to Stand show a second time. Well, at Perry's Roast and Toast, Mike Galvin got to get up and talk. And I remember this. Mike, of course, the oldest of the 10 children, and he said he was asked to write down 10 things he learned from his dad, tying into the fact that they had 10 kids. First thing Mike says when he gets up, he says, well, I'm glad it's only 10. I don't have the entire tape, but I had part of it and cut my ear right away. Eric, we're going to get ready now. The Dugout Singers came and sang to Perry. Okay, the Dugout was a restaurant, I think it was the Country Kitchen, and then they changed it into the Dugout. And Perry would go to coffee. Yeah, he'd get a lot of leads. Steel billboard, auction things, whatever. But he went to coffee most days. And so they had a group, and on this, you're going to hear them sing. They came and sang to him on his last day of work. So this is as it sounded on December 31st, 1999. Kevin Sweeney from the Journal, Bill Steinke, Bill Keckeritz, Dan Rhodes, Steve Reinhardt, Coffee Friends from Morning Coffee, and what they sang to Perry, it was called The Ballad of Big Perry. Eric?
Big Perry, Big Perry, Big Perry. Every morning at the station, you could see him arrive. He stood 5'6" and weighed 245. On top and broad at the hip, and everybody knew you'd get a lot of lip. Big Perry, Big Perry, Big Perry, Big Perry Galvin. He's got a wife named Marion, and the woman's a saint. She's all the good things that Perry ain't. He's got 10 children who are all fully grown, because Marion never could say, leave me alone. Big Perry loves sports, and that's how he makes a living. Because when it comes to betting, he's taken, not given. He's got a friend, Mikey, who put his kids through college. Because Mikey couldn't match the great sports knowledge of Big Perry. Big Perry, Big Perry, Big Perry Galvin.
Okay, there they were. And of course, Perry and the Friday Galvin Groaner. Infamous. It still exists to this day. The Friday Groaner is still on, still sponsored by the Wanda State Bank. Perry knew Don Schumacher out there, and that all got started. So somewhere, I'm not sure what year it was, but it got going. All right, trivia question. What was the last groaner that Perry did on the radio? I happen to know the answer. So here you go. And this came, Perry quoted this, he said, this came from T.R. Olson's grandson, okay? And it was, of course, December, so bowl games are going on, football. So Perry says, so why did the football coach go to the bank? To get his quarterback. Typical Galvin Groaner. That was the last one he did. Perry was a team player. He was fair. You had to just tell him things once. He could do most things at a station except engineering, not even changing batteries in his recorder. He took time to care. He was prompt. He was, as he called himself, Perry the pace setter. Because you gave him something, or if there's a new sales package, he got on it right away. And he was fun. I'd take a Perry Galvin on my staff anytime. He taught me never to assume. He knew someday I wanted to be a manager at a radio station, and he took time, many times, to share with me some tips on what a manager would need to do. He'd tell me in his car, he'd call me in his office. He took time to care. I remember those things. He helped me. He taught me that you can never over-communicate. One of the several signs he had taped up by his general manager's desk, he had several sayings and affirmations that were taped up there. I learned from that. He and I would go in the fall on Friday afternoons to Tubby Walzer's sauna parlor. Tubby was blinded by diabetes in his midlife. He was a former coach at Cathedral High School, right, Don? Tubby was? Yep. Okay. And Tubby was on the air with us on our Player of the Week show. And again, he was blind, and we had him on. We called it the As I See It Pro Football Prediction. Well, Perry and I would have separate bets with Tubby on football games. All right, so I'll take the Vikings, you give me 2 points, whatever it was. And we'd either pay double for our sauna, or we'd get a free one. So we'd walk down, and Perry would greet Tubby as we walked down into the basement. There's a sauna and massage area there. And Perry would greet Tubby always with, "Tubby, where are you, you dirty rat?" Tubby would reply, talk it up, baby, you wise guy. You're paying me double today. I won last week." I relish the memory of me and Perry going to Tubby's on Friday afternoons at 4 o'clock in the fall during football season. Perry, like Walt Mickelson, George Karenshin, Bill Macklin, and Doris Ofterheide, is a New Ulm media icon. Perry told me that Walt Mickelson sat in on the interview that he did when he came to the Journal in 1959. And Walt asked him, "What are your qualifications for this job?" True story. "What are your qualifications for this job?" Perry proudly said, "I'm a graduate of the School of Journalism at the University of Minnesota." Pause. Walt Mickelson says, "Well, we won't hold that against you." Perry told me that a couple of times. But Walt Mickelson was kind of like a father to Perry. Really did a great thing. But like all of those people, Mickelson, Karenshin, Bill Macklin, Doris Ofterheide, Perry is a media icon in New Ulm. For anybody that knows the history, he certainly is. Well, if you heard the story about, say, as a person, many people help you along the way, and they pack your parachute, all right, so to speak. I mentioned this at the retirement program in 2000. Perry packed mine many times. I clearly remember when Perry came in to tell me he was going to retire at the end of 1999. And with a phrase he shared with me from time to time, he told me at that meeting, he said, "Jim, me and my dog are tired. It's time to retire." And he has. I'll close as Perry would have at about 8:20 a.m. each weekday. That's your 860 News Line. Perry Galvin reporting. Thank you.